Friday and you buy a badge for Saturday, you're counted as one person. Other conventions, if you buy a badge for Friday and you buy a badge for Saturday, you're counted as 2 people. And that's an old marketing thing that it's not wrong. It means that your exhibitors have twice as much chance, theoretically, of getting this same person to come by your booth. For us, we don't do that because it doesn't make sense for us. If we ended up counting our numbers that way, we'd probably have 330 to 360,000 people. If an exhibitor came to our show expecting 330,000 people and did enough business for 160,000 people or 130,000 people, the news out of that show is, wow, there were a lot of people at the show, but half of them didn't buy product. Well, you know what? Majority of them did buy product, but we gave you a false start from which to start. So we don't do that. And you know, I think one of the things Rob and I were talking about before, it's how you market. There are shows that have a lot of people, and are they buying? Are they paying attendees? Are they attendees who get free badges? Are they familiar with the comic convention? Are they going just to see what a comic convention is? It's amazing. There's a show that I've been to a couple of times. It has a huge reach. But what's remarkable is I watch people leaving the facility and none of them have attendee bags. None of them have product. There's a lot of families, but none of them are wearing superhero shirts. And that tells me just anecdotally that these are people who wanted to see what a comics convention was. They may not have had an interest in it. I don't know how long they stayed. And with San Diego, somebody who comes to Comic-Con typically comes when the doors open at 9 and leaves when the doors close at 7 or stay later. A lot of these other conventions may actually have as many people as they claim because people stay for 1 hour or 2 hours. They come in, they look, and they leave. So numbers are always a weird thing. Demographics and psychographics can be as well. So it's a real challenge doing what we do and trying to make sure the information that's out there is as accurate as it possibly can be.
David, what have you noticed about the changing audience at Comic-Con? Is it, are you seeing a different kind of fan, or any observations about as the show has grown from being sort of hardcore old school people to a broader audience? What way of the
when I first started going to Comic-Con, Comic-Con was the first convention that I was introduced to, and then I started going to science fiction conventions. It was a big science fiction event. And one of the things that I found was, I mean, when I came to Comic-Con, it was like, you know, my tribe. I mean, there were people who got me. I was a big Star Trek fan. I couldn't believe that I could walk into the exhibit hall and find like tricorders and you know, communicate, all this kind of stuff. What we've seen now is there's a lot more, there's still a hardcore fans who attend our show. And then maybe hardcore fans of comics, science fiction, fantasy, film, now gaming, prop making, costuming, all those different things. But one of the things that there's been a change that I've seen is you mentioned open-mindedness. It's the open-mindedness of people allowing themselves to be exposed to new things and actually lobbing onto that. We had a story, and I may be wrong with the paper, but it was a reporter who came to cover the Watchmen movie. And I think she was from the LA Times. And we did an interview, and on Sunday, and as she was leaving, she had her bags of comics. And I said, oh, how cool, you're a comics fan. She said, no, I'm really not. I don't know anything about comics. But I was interviewing this retailer, and he said, you know what? You should check these out. Well, she made it a point to stop by the press desk the following year, and I said, oh, you know, what's your story on this time? She said, you know, actually, I'm not doing a story. I came because these comics were so cool that I'm starting to read comics. And I think there is something that we see a lot more now, and that is people willing to go ahead and broaden their horizons. When we advertise our show, and really don't advertise Comic-Con anymore because we have more people who want to attend than we can accommodate. But we do WonderCon, we do a targeted advertising. We don't do a shotgun approach to just people wherever. We want to get people who have a basic interest in pop culture. Because we know those people will find something on a show that they really like and maybe come back again. I think some of these other shows are just trying to get people through the door. I don't mean to sound ill of other shows, but I think that happens sometimes. So if there is something that I've seen, I don't know if it's much of a change, but we've seen it on a much larger scale.
Yeah, and one of the differences is that, as some of you may know, that San Diego Comic-Con, like this show and like some other shows around the country, is essentially a nonprofit. So it's mission-driven. Bigger shows like New York Comic-Con, run by Reed Pop, and Fan Expo, which is run by Informa, and of course Wizard World. These are commercial companies that are publicly traded, or in some cases, or have profit margin priorities. What do you see as some of the biggest differences between those two models?
We're mandated by a mission statement. If you go to our website, you see a mission statement on there, and that's basically to promote comics and popular art to a wider audience. So that's what we live for. I'm very, very lucky, and if John, our president, was here, he'd probably hit me. But I've never been told, we got to increase the bottom line. We got to increase the bottom line. I've never been told that, and for a marketing person, that's really unusual. In fact, my new title now is Chief Communications and Strategy Officer. They've taken marketing out of that altogether. And it's not that the show sells itself, but that's such a small focus of what we do that it seemed really kind of silly to have that as a department title. I think what we end up trying to do is we're fans. We try to put on the type of show we want to attend. If there's ever a time when Comic-Con loses its way, it's not, we have no one else to blame but ourselves. It's not because another show is usurping us or is better than us or whatever. It means that we've taken our eye off the ball. So we're driven by making sure that we produce the type of show that we want to attend, and more importantly, our attendees want to attend. So our profit margin isn't very high. I mean, we make a lot of money, but it takes a lot of money to produce our shows. For many years, we ran the Alternative Press Expo. We ran that at a loss. And I think we had it for almost 20 years. And that didn't matter because Comic-Con allowed us to do that. We've entered into some other associations, the ones with Lionsgate, with the CCHQ. That money is allowing us to do other stuff that we've never been able to do either. So that's very exciting for us. So long as we don't lose our focus, I think we'll be okay. And I'm not saying that these other shows don't have that same focus, but we really are mandated by our mission statement.
Of course, one of the things that happened in the, over the past 20 years or so is that comics-based content, which used to be known only to the select few that were into this sort of nerdy medium, suddenly became the fuel for the entertainment and media and technology and marketing industries, and is powering, all of these global franchises. The people that are investing millions of dollars to make these movies, at least at the outset, they wanted to make sure that their opening weekends were going to be big. They needed influential fans to come in and tell all of their friends, to go see the movies. And so this whole dynamic developed where the Hollywood studios would come to Comic-Con because that's where the fans already were, and they would wow them with these giant presentations, and all of the fans would go out and say, "Wow, I just saw the coolest thing in Hall H." And it was hoped that the echo of that experience would fuel the money that was coming into the box office on this. And then at a certain point, I think it became more of an expectation that's okay, I'm going to Comic-Con, so there's going to be all of these big stars there, and things like that. And I think that there's people that sort of set in motion a cycle.
Well, it's interesting because we have good relationships with TV networks and movie studios, and we're very honest with them when we talk to them. If you give us, and we tell them, if you give us a presentation in a Hall H that is 3 minutes out of your 2-hour movie, and it's the best of that movie, our audience is going to go crazy. But if you can't deliver on that trailer or whatever, you know what? We're not dumb. We're not going to give you money if the movie sucks. You can't blame us for that. And people read the trade papers, and a lot of times they do. The influence of Comic-Con is waning because, wow, it was such a hit at the show, but it didn't translate to dollars at the box office. Well, because the movie sucked. You can't blame us for that. But also, one of the things that we tell our attendees too, and one of the things actually that they tell us is, in our most recent survey, we found out that 80% of the people who attend Comic-Con would still attend a Hollywood panel if it didn't have footage or didn't have major stars. And the studios and networks don't understand that. Because as fans, we love producers, we love writers, we love prop makers, we love costume designers. We got some crap a couple of years ago for having a panel on the show The Office. And it was a show, everyone said, you know, it's a celebrity thing, you're selling out, yada, yada, yada. Well, there were no stars on it, but it was a showrunner, a writer, a producer, who else. It was one of our most successful panels. And the reason being is there's a lot of people in the audience who, A, enjoy how things are made, but B, are budding writers, producers, you know, whatever it happens to be. So we hit that mark, and sometimes people don't understand that. And we kind of get crap sometimes when they just take things at face value. If they would look at the reason why we do stuff, why fans attend, they'd have a clear and much more accurate understanding of what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get things where they have pressed the right buttons to activate the Comic-Con audience, but then the movie, like Scott Pilgrim was a good example of that, where I was at that presentation at Hall H. It was the best thing at that show, for sure. People were on fire. They couldn't wait to see this movie, and then it kind of goes away, and nobody else got it, which is kind of too bad. I think that's more what's wrong with the rest of the country than what's wrong with us. But there was a great moment in 2006. It wasn't great for the people that were there, or the people on stage. It was at the Vertigo panel, and they were announcing, they came out and they said, we have this great big announcement to make. We're making the movie for John Constantine, Hellblazer. Everybody was like, whoa, great, that sounds great. And you know who's going to be in the movie? Keanu Reeves. Like, rickets. And you could see like the blood like drain down their faces. They were like, we thought you guys were going to like that. Like he was in the Matrix and y'all like that, right? And they were like, yeah, no.
There's a similar story. I don't know how many of you were at that panel at San Diego in 1989, was it? When Warner Brothers did a panel on, they were going to do a Batman movie. And I think Gil Kane was there. Jackie just left. I think Gil Kane was there. And everyone was very excited about it. But they started getting a little nervous because they said the director was going to be Tim Burton, who was most famous for Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And then they announced that a comedic actor, Michael Keaton, was going to be the star. And everybody began to think that it was going to be more based on the TV show than on Frank Miller's book. But Gil had a headshot of Michael Keaton and drew a cowl on him, and people were like, "You gotta work." So yeah, I mean, if you have the right reason, it's good. Sometimes I think Rob is absolutely right. Sometimes the biggest problem is when I think studios or whoever it happens to be tries to predict what it is a fan will like based on their limited knowledge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So we had some questions.
Yeah, I was wondering what the impact on Comic-Con is or will be with Disney buying up a lot of
everything.
major Marvel, Star Wars.
We have a really good relationship with Disney, but I'll be very honest with you. The truth of the matter is, if they start doing their own events, if we start losing stuff, then our show may end up being smaller. We'll still do it. We'll get paid less. We may be able to do less than we were before, but I think we're committed to putting on a show so long as people want to attend. But that's a great question because you never know. Now I will say something too. Sometimes people think that you can just, say comic convention, people throw money at you, or pop culture convention. Just this past year, a major magazine did a pop culture convention, and it tanked. And they spent a tremendous amount of money on it. Well, you know what? One of the things I always tell studios and networks is, look, if you have something cool, actually I tell this to everybody who wants to do a presentation. If you have something cool, share it with our audience. Don't sell it. Because you know what? We're used to getting sold to all the time. And I think what happens is, like with this pop culture convention, they thought pop culture is big, San Diego is huge, we're an umbrella magazine, we can get all these things together, it's going to be massive. And it wasn't. So we don't know, we're still waiting to see. This gentleman over here.
That's a good question to segue into. The thing is, Comic-Con became that tentpole that all the studios can put their name to and know they're going to have a big audience. They can put out a press release. It means something, sort of like Cannes or whatever. And then you look at CES and what happened there, where Apple no longer presents at CES, Microsoft no longer presents, and they do their own thing. That could be like what Disney does.
Yes.
It could actually make it could bring Comic-Con back to you made a comment. A lot of people think, oh, well, you've gone away from your base to service all these media partners.
Well, there's an economy of scale that's working in favor of Comic-Con, which is that the press that covers this stuff wants to go to one event to get that news. And so even though New York Comic-Con is really trying to set itself up as, you know, like as a separate pole of this, I think there's a lot of resistance from, oh, do we have to go to 2 of these things to get the same coverage? We'd rather go to one place. And the Comic-Con is already there. It's right down the street from Hollywood, you know, relatively speaking. And the studios don't want to set up at multiple places, and the people that are giving the attention, Comic-Con generates something like 10 billion media impressions over the weekend.
Far more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very, very large number, and that it may look to the Disneys and Warner Brothers and Hasbros of the world that they would be better off carving off their own walled gardens of this, but they may find that that cutting off 1/3 of the pie makes for a much smaller piece than they thought, rather than the pie as a whole.
And I think also to what you mentioned, which I think is true too, is if the show shrinks, the show shrinks. I mean, it's something we wouldn't want necessarily, but we're not going to. We want to make sure that the fans come first, right? Because that's why we do the shows. The reason why we have interactive multimedia and video games now is because fans wanted that. The reason why Hollywood was always an aspect of the show, but I can't tell you how many times we say no to things that Hollywood wants to do. You may not see it on the front end, but it's a lot. And in fact, we have a reputation for being difficult to deal with. And we try not to be. We just want to make sure that whatever we do doesn't have an impact on the people sitting in the
I've been
audience.
on the studio side.
Yeah,
with that.
Right, okay, well then you know full well.
But we've always enjoyed the fact that you did say no, and what we ended up with, because both of us are fans, and so we were brought in to help with those. And from our point of view, we like to hear what you're saying, and to the woman's point earlier about Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, I don't think it's going to change whether Lucasfilm comes. I don't think it's going to change whether or not DC and Marvel still send their artists. So whether Disney wants to control some of that, it's not going to change, to your point,
I hope so.
being the destination for artists.
And some people may forget, but Marvel sat out the show for many years.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the whole thing, but it was never a Comic-Con, we're going to punish you. That was not the reason. And I remember there was a 60 Minutes reporter who was doing something or other, and said, "Where's Marvel?" I said, "Actually, Marvel doesn't have a floor, presence on the floor." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, totally off the record, you couldn't tell." Nobody hears it. I mean, now we want Marvel at the show, that makes it better, but I think your point is well taken.
I'm just so very happy both of you are here, Friends of Comic-Con Forum, and you had mentioned, Mr. Glanzer, that John Rogers is your boss, of course, and he's been to Comicfest prior. Something he mentioned when he came as a guest at this convention was that the attendee's pocketbook is very central to the decisions that you make. And he was speaking specifically to hotel prices and badges being under the $300 range. It's a two-part question basically for both of you. In terms of Comic-Con, how do you feel that you're doing? That was 2 years ago. How do you feel you're doing in keeping that attendee's pocketbook central?
I think we could always do better. I will tell you there are two things that really, and us staying in San Diego, you hear about us possibly moving and people are always talking about it. People rarely ask us what they're talking about. We've always said we want to stay in San Diego forever. It's where we were born, it's where, and the city, and by the city, I mean the city council and the mayor really are working with us. You'll see outside activations and stuff so that people can do some of their stuff outside now because there's just no more room inside the hall. But I will tell you, some of the biggest problems we have right now are hotel room blocks. We try to get as many rooms at a hotel as we possibly can, and we try to negotiate a fair rate. And that fair rate is higher than what that rate would normally be. But it's something that the hotels really want, and it's something that I think if we're careful with it, hopefully our fans can afford. We're having some trouble with that. There are some hotels, our contract expires next year. We're having some trouble with that because some hotels want to give us less room blocks, charge more for those room blocks, and then charge exorbitant rates outside of that. And their argument is, and this isn't all hotels, but a lot of their arguments for some of them are, well, yes, your fans may not be able to pay for that, but you know what, the studio execs will pay that in a heartbeat. And we have to tell them, yeah, but if there's no fans, there's no studio execs. And that's a really important thing for people to understand. And the other thing that's kind of hurting us right now, to be honest with you, is outside non-sanctioned activations. And the reason for that is some of them charge money. And it may not seem like a lot of money, but when an exhibitor comes to San Diego, it's not a cheap show to do. When an exhibitor comes to San Diego, you want to be able to say, you know, a good portion of that disposable income that is for collectibles and whatever is going to be spent on the floor. Well, when somebody opens across the street and is charging $15 for a shirt, $20 for a hat, whatever it happens to be, all of a sudden, that percentage of what the fan spends at San Diego in the building diminishes. It may still be a lot of money to the exhibitors, but their profit margin starts to decrease. And that is something that's very scary to us.
And if I could just add that what you've just heard there is a lot more thought than many convention organizers give to that particular issue. Because I think that San Diego, because it grew up organically, has a you know, made a lot of mistakes to get to the wisdom that you've got around these issues. A lot of newer conventions come in and they have, number one, they're for-profit. Number two, they have their target attendance and they have their target exhibitor stuff and things like that, and they work from that backwards and say, okay, how are we going to fill our exhibit floor? How are we going to pay our guests these big guarantees to come to our show? And you know, and then the thought that there is some limit to the fan pocketbook is the last thing on their mind. And for this reason, you're seeing a lot of smaller markets getting very highly saturated with shows, and you wonder, can Indianapolis sustain 7 major pop culture shows in a year? Can Seattle, which is where I'm from, which is a pretty big market, sustain, you know, 4 or 5 gigantic, you know, Emerald City, SakuraCon, PAX, all of this stuff within the course of a calendar year, if it's attracting the same fans and the same dollars?
Since you spoke about the hotels, one of the issues in the city is the expansion of the convention center and the rise in the transit of the occupancy tax.
So we had 2 measures that were on the ballot this last November. All in one prohibited an expansion of the convention center. The other one was a charter plan to build a stadium that had a convention facility. The real big problem with that, and one or both of those would increase the TOT, which is a tax that if you're from out of town that you pay on top of your hotel bill, would raise it considerably, which a lot of hotels were afraid was going to have a negative impact on people visiting. The biggest problem that we had was if there was a convention facility across the street or blocks away, as the proposals were, it's very difficult for us to tell the exhibitor, oh look, we want you at Comic-Con, but you're going to be 16 blocks away. Some of you may remember, if you go to Comic-Con for a long time, that about 20 years ago, we wanted to use the sales pavilion, so we moved some people upstairs. Oh my God. That was like Rob said, we've learned from our errors. People let us know, look, we want to be in the foot traffic area. So a lot of the politicians didn't understand that, and in fact, one local congressman even said, Comic-Con isn't going anywhere, San Diego's the biggest thing, yada, 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 you know. And it's like so short-sighted because
Charges aren't going to go anywhere.
well, exactly. And the thing is, we will stay in San Diego as long as we can. But if our attendees tell us, look, it's too expensive, it's not working out, then we're going to have to try to find a solution for that. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily believe that on the public side. But there is now, the mayor seems to have gotten back onto the idea of an expanded convention center. So we have our fingers crossed for that. There's a whole bunch of things on the back end. There's where it's supposed to be expanded into, there's some dispute about land over there. So luckily, I leave that up to somebody else. We have our fingers crossed.
I know you guys were saying about movie studios will do a great presentation, but they won't translate well. But I've seen the opposite, you know, with Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I mean, they did a presentation, but it was a great movie, and everybody I talked to loved it, but it didn't do well at the box office, and it's a cult hit. I mean, there's midnight shows, so
They screened that movie for their entire core audience at the convention. I think that was actually one of the problems with that campaign.
That was the entire audience, and,
Yes.
and they all went many, many times. That was it.
My first convention was in 1978, so I'm one of
Mine
those.
too.
Very, very much the same. Actually, we have the same thoughts on a lot of things that we already mentioned. I want to take the opportunity to tell you that your staff that work with the disabled and accessibility are phenomenal. I travel with a person in a wheelchair, and you're one of the few few conventions she'll ever go to, and she actually feels safe there.
Great,
And
thank
people
you.
talk about how big the convention is, and it isn't. It's sure Hall
I love
H can
you.
be crazy.
Are you recording this?
Hall H can be crazy, but we're not the type that goes to Hall H. You know, that's only 7,000 seats or whatever it is.
Right.
That's not the whole convention. So,
Exactly.
you know, if those movies go away, we're still coming. Right. But your staff treats the accessibility with compassion but not pity. And that's a big difference between other conventions. Other conventions don't want them. And it's amazing what some of the other conventions write up as accessibility. And I write about specific on these names that I always know it there. And goes out of this.
Well, thank you. You know, Robert Goodwin was a gentleman who did a lot in disabled services, and he was in a wheelchair himself. And I remember a reporter once saying, you know, how was it dealing with so many people? It's like, you know what, we all come from different backgrounds. We all, you know, want to make sure that we all have a good time. We actually have more ADA seating in a lot of our rooms than is required because it just makes sense. But I remember doing this interview once, and Robert, who should have known better, had an electric wheelchair and was like zooming down, you know, and out of habit, I'm all, no running. You know, get slowed down, you know. So
But
there's
the
no
fact that
difference.
she feels safe in those crowds because you've done such a good job.
I have to tell you, one of the first things when I first started as a volunteer, my boss told me, you know, pop culture, comics, this is our big thing, this is what we're known for. But I will tell you right now, our biggest thing is safety. And trying to make sure that people are as safe as they possibly can be. And back in the day, parents would drop their kids off and then pick them up at 5. Now you can't even imagine that today, but we used to have this huge board where you could write, because there was no paging, nobody had cell phones. You know, Jimmy so-and-so, mom was here at 5, you better be here at 6.
My first convention was in 1992, and I was one of those kids who was dropped off. And
you made it home.
Yeah, I turned out fine. But seeing the convention grow and change over 20 some odd years, I'm one of the people who, you know, when I tell people I go to Comic-Con every year, the first question is, well, do you dress up? And then I say no, because it's July and it's hot. And then, you know, what movies did you see? And I say none, and then they kind of look confused. And so I just kind of wanted to reiterate the love that I gave to you guys about keeping the comic book programming as, you know, by and large, the biggest block of programming that you have at Comic-Con, the guest list, and even, you know, even if they're not on the special guest list, the number of comic creators that attend is still bigger.
I love you too.
Far superior than any other show. And so you know, that has always kind of been, you know, because if you listen to what's said out there and what you know goes on in the media and things like that, that comics are diminishing. I'm one of those people who say, no, they're still there. There's just a lot of other stuff that's around it. And I want to say thank you for keeping comic books central to the show.
Well, we touch on an issue that is kind of a thing, which is the people that go to the shows and the people that are fans know what's going on there. And then the media that's close to the events know what's going on. And then there's kind of a game of telephone that extends, and the farther out you get from that circle, the more the misconceptions, you know, about like, oh, it's all about cosplayer, it's all about this. But then the biggest one that you get is, like, people know that I go down to San Diego Comic-Con every July, and they say, oh, I went to the Comic-Con here in Cleveland, you know, or whatever, last, you know, or my daughter went to the Comic-Con that was in Phoenix, and they think that it's all one big enterprise, when in fact it's run by a lot of different people. I guess, how do you guard the perception of your event as separate from some of the knockoffs?
Some people probably may know we're involved in some litigation, so there's not a lot I can talk about that. I will say we do have license agreements with some conventions. It was never really an issue for us when there were good conventions, that there was never any confusion with us. I mean, you didn't have to assert your mark if there was no problem with that. That's beginning to change. Rob mentioned how these conventions are changing a lot. A lot of them are almost just autograph shows now. And when we start getting complaints, because fans feel that they're not getting their money's worth. When they are not getting whatever happens to be at a show that isn't ours, then that causes problems for us. And for one of those, and I can't really say more about that, but it's something that we're keenly aware of and we stay up at night about.
And that just changed with LA
Yeah.
a few months ago.
So we have time for we have time for one more question.
I guess as an attendee and having experienced Comic-Con 20 years ago to today in different ways, I was in a wheelchair for the past 2 years. Thankfully, that's working out. So I've gotten a lot of experience in different aspects of Comic-Con, and I'm looking at this board, and I see the future of Comic-Con and what the brand really is. That has a tendency to split off, and it will, because those communities are so separate. What makes Comic-Con great is that the cohesion of these groups gets better and better as
Give me
time goes
goosebumps,
on.
and you're absolutely right. I will tell you something. I'm glad that you're doing better too. I'll tell you something.
Thank you.
It's remarkable, and I say this every once in a while. The people that attend Comic-Con, I don't know that they would necessarily hang out on any other weekend, but during Comic-Con, you know what? Everybody's friends. I mean, whether it's whether it's an attorney or a college jock or a nerd like me or whatever it happens to be, and everyone appreciates that somebody else has an interest in whatever it happens to be. And for that's one of the things I'm happy and proud of.
You talked about protected. To me,
Yeah.
the strongest thing is protected
Yeah.
that we can be whoever we
Well,
want to be.
the vibe of this, when I was first there and there was 35,000 people and stuff like that, and I went back and I went by myself and then I told my wife and I said, you have to come down here. She wasn't all into it. That changed. But just when you walk, when those doors open for the first time on preview night and you walk in and there's 100,000 people all ready to have the time of their lives, it can't help but be an incredible thing. Like that much positive energy in one place.
And you belong.
You belong.
And one of the things I think we've always strived to say is we're nerds and geeks and whatever, but we've always had a great time. We always knew this was a great event. The world is welcome, but you're coming to our party. So, you know what, just as if you would go to a neighbor's house, you're gonna be on your best behavior, and if you're not, then we're gonna ask you to leave. And it's not trying to be, dickish or anything like that. It's just, it is a safe environment. I mean, it should be a safe environment. This is us. You're more than welcome to join. Hey, the more the merrier, right? But if you can't, if you want to be derisive or something like that, then you don't belong here, and we don't want you here.
So thank you all for coming out. Join me in thanking David. If you feel like sticking around, I will be in the same room, in the same seat for the next hour, talking about the future of comic storytelling in the digital era. And I have some really terrific guests. So Paul Guinan and Anna Bennett and the folks from Madefire will be here talking about virtual reality comics and all kinds of cool stuff. So if that interests you, stick around. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of your
Thank you very much, everybody.
And I have a table in the exhibit room selling these guys, $25. What a deal.
We're gonna get this. You guys weren't there if you don't have a picture.